Question to the panel here. Where do you see HR to be in 5 years? Somebody want to take a chance? Aga, it's on your, I know.
Okay. Let me take the first turn then. Where I see HR in 5 years, I think it really depends whether the company is in the race to the bottom or in the race to the top. What do I mean by that? I think for some companies, HR is going to be downgraded, and this will happen in companies that are focusing on cost cutting and efficiencies, and basically companies who try to stick to that old industrial model. But for companies who are in the race to the top, I think that actually the role of HR is going to be elevated, and that famous seat at the table that we've been talking about for decades now, it's eventually going to be there. And I believe that actually HR is going to be one of the most important functions, if not the most important function in a company. But what HR will have to be able to do well in order to get there is, for me, first to understand the business and really be a savvy business person and have a good understanding of the technology and the new developments. And then finally, use the skills, the human skills that HR has. Don't forget those. I suppose that's quite important to mention nowadays. And start influencing and creating structures and architecture where good stuff can emerge. Because it's not about sending papers anymore. It's not about telling people what to do. It will be about creating that environment where innovation and all this good stuff that you want to see will be able to organically emerge without controls and without very rigid structures. So that's my take on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe to build off of what Aga was sharing, which I totally agree with. I think one, in terms of capabilities, I think in order for HR professionals to have a seat at that table and to be a CHRO, I think it's actually leadership skills. So a lot of HR are training their organizations to develop leadership skills, but may not necessarily be going through it themselves. And in order to have the influence needed, leadership is absolutely critical. To be able to know how to have that, and then also just hardcore critical thinking skills and systems thinking. I think in order to be able to basically spar, back and forth with the C-suite, you have to understand the macroeconomic environment, the industry trends, business strategy, and how then the people part fits into that. And so, I hear sometimes HR people, I don't like numbers. Well, you kind of have to know numbers, right? So it's like it's really also developing, both the technical as well as the soft skills in order to basically have that seat and be relevant. Because I think if you do, you will naturally be pulled in. And so I think that it's kind of two ways. It's a culture, but it's also kind of the onus on us as individuals to develop and constantly learn.
Yeah.
It's sort of just wrapped up in either we Uber ourselves or we get Kodak'd. HR. I think that hits pretty much what I'm thinking, and I agree. I often hear I went into human resource because I wanted to deal with people, not with numbers, and it's just probably the broadest topic and field you can actually be in, and it just needs everything. And the broader you are yourself, you learn, develop yourself, the better you will be. And we have to up our game. That's exactly what we have to do.
Thank you. Matthias, you work with a lot of clients here at PwC. Do you see that mind shift changing when you talk to senior HR leaders?
Well, I wouldn't say that the HR function is already the early adopter of these kind of technologies that we're talking about, but it's coming, and I think sometimes through pure necessity, as I mentioned earlier, when you all of a sudden have to deal with a lot more employees to service as an HR function, you may not have a choice but to look at ways as how you can leverage technology to automate functions. But also, I think the realization that employees are, and being in a consulting company, I subscribe to that fully, are, I think, the most important asset that a company has, to invest in that asset and to not be a laggard as an HR function, but perhaps even a trendsetter. That's what I would expect from a courageous and strong CHRO, is to step up at the board table and say, we're going to try that out first internally before you even think of selling that to your clients. So I think that's what I would like to see in the future as well.
Enrico, I see you're nodding. I think you have something to add here.
No, I think we will, the skill set for people in HR will dramatically change. We will need to find answers for questions we even can formalize today. We will not need recruiters who recruit in the way they do today, because a big piece in that you can automate, and anyway the job market is changing. So we'll probably more need people who do the role of a career advisor and give with that comfort and trust to people, and based on that they decide to join your organization or not. So the entire attitude, and with that also the skill set, will need to change.
And yeah, how can artificial intelligence help here? How far are we actually? You're in this field for 25 years? Or how long? I mean, is it all just like buzzwords, or is it reality?
In terms of that question, I think that what often is called in the sort of general press as AI, or I tend to think of it more as augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. I think what it will mean within 5 years is that the HR departments will be smaller, right? As somebody who thinks computationally, we break everything out into tasks, and then you look at them, and not all of your job will be able to be replaced easily, but the bits, and we'll automate little bits of those type of things. And I think that's going to change. But for me, when we're doing that, that only addresses the sort of superficial level. The first thing to look at on how AI will deal with our organization is not to think about, okay, I can replace this person's job by this bot. Right? It's to think about the second order effects. If that happens, what is else? What I was talking about was not something that making what we were originally doing cheaper. It was changing the sort of economic production curve, AI, and that enables you to do something you couldn't effectively do before, right? And then if you do that, then there's something else. So if we think outside HR, if we think about automated cars, do we need car parking spaces, right? If the cars can drive around. How is that going to change our cities? How is it going to change ownership structure? And it's not the first part about me getting in a car this morning at 5 o'clock and thinking, gosh, I'm tired. I'm going to have to drive to Zurich and therefore press a button and it does. It's what does it look like, right? What do our cities look like? And it's those second and even third order effects, I think, that good thinking should be done around the AI.
And I have a urgent question for Aga, I think. Well, we deliver AI for HR. We develop digital role play for practical training. So play as you go, play by doing. And I very much feel like that guy of the 1900 that felt like developing something that was adopted 45 years ago. By the way, SAP Worldwide is one of our early adopters, so thank you guys. And the question is, how can we make that disruptive strike to come before 45 years? Because most of the time I see people get scared. I mean, everybody wants to get there, but then in the end, we present what we do, and that works. That's amazing. We have results, but they say, wow, hold on, wait the next strike. So how can we make that strike happen the real way? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think it's such a great question, and probably it's a question that's on many people's minds. And so what is my take on that? I think that in order to really enable people to embrace those things, you need to create that safe environment, as I said in my short speech. And how do you do that? Well, it is about culture, eventually. And we cannot teach culture. Culture cannot be taught. It can only be caught, is what I like to say, just like we catch a cold. So what do I mean by that? Well, we need to find a way to make those new behaviors spread. But before we even identify the way to make those new behaviors spread and people embrace, I think the first important step is we need to imagine what our ideal culture is going to look like. So if we want to fulfill our mission and reach our vision and achieve our business objectives, who will we have to become? And it's really important to have that clarity, like 2020 vision of what our ideal culture is going to look like if we want to be future ready. And of course, there are many different ways to accomplish that. And as soon as you have that clarity, comes the next step, which is, okay, so where are we now? What is the baseline? What are we starting from? And it's all about putting our culture under a microscope and continuing with this analogy of an operating system. I think it's asking ourselves, what are the features of that software that we love and that we are really proud of and that are going to help us to implement all these changes? And what are the bugs? And how do we get rid of them? And so when you have that contrast, where we want to go, where we are today, of course, the next stage, and this is tricky, is you want to bridge that gap. And I see a lot of organizations sort of jump on it and try to do everything at the same time. And I think this is the major problem. You want to be able to identify few critical pieces of the culture puzzle. 2 things, perhaps 3, that you are really going to have laser focus on and invest all your energy in really making it happen. And it cannot be done by mandate, so it can't come from the top. We can't tell our people, okay, you have to do this. This is the order now, and everyone needs to go in that direction. It doesn't happen like that. As I said, it's not taught. It has to be caught. So you need to figure out ways. How do we make it viral? How do we make those 2 or 3 critical elements of our culture so interesting, so awesome, that people, just like you said in your speech, will want to do those things even beyond office hours. They will talk to each other about it. They will send emails. They will say, you won't believe what happened in that team. They are using this tool, and this is what they have accomplished. And you always have early adapters. So there will be some people who are generally very enthusiastic about those things. And then there will be the laggers who need some time to see that, yes, it becomes mainstream and it's safe, and I will join. So some people take bigger risks, some people not. But I think focus, for me, to bridge that gap is super, super important. And you need to know how to identify those leverage points. Because one last thing that I will say, sorry, is that...
She promised something.
Yeah, one last thing, I promise. You are too busy to do all these initiatives, so you need to find ways, the right leverage points, to accomplish the impact that you want to create with the least amount of effort. That's why it's so important, I think, for me to know what are the 2 things that we're going to be focusing on going forward. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to jump in on this in terms of technology adoption. I think the best AI, the best technology is invisible, right? We don't really think about it. We type in a question about Zurich. How wide is the lake at Zurich? There are more than one Lake Zurichs in the world, but we recognise the fact that we're in Zurich in Switzerland, and therefore sends us a fact box. If we thought of what Google was doing 5-6 years ago, it would show us the 10 closest links, or what it thought it was. Now it packages that information, it tells you about Zurich, tells you about the lake, probably tells you about the water temperature, and you don't think about all of the AI. And we'll talk about the linked data and stuff that enables to do that, but it's invisible. We don't think about it. And I think the best technologies in our business will be adopted really quickly when they're completely invisible.
I haven't heard any mention of, because inherent in the development of technology is the fashion trend in the last 20 years of agile development technologies, or Scrum and those kinds of things. And I've started to see some of those people who are have been using those techniques for a number of years, interested in org development and actually taking on leading roles in HR. So I have 2 questions, a curiosity in that space, and then also looking at the capacities for human change, the humans and the ability to change to actually take these on, because you have the younger folk who may be stereotypically associated with being able to just absorb it, and then you have the more wise elements where it's like, no, let's just take a bit of time with this, And so I'm just curious, any thoughts from the panel on those topics?
Lilian, do you want to take this?
Yes, sure. I don't, well, it's a stereotype, but in my experience, it's not an age question. It's more the mindset. So you have like very vivid 50-plus-year-olds, and then you have like the more traditional 20, 25, 23-year-olds. So I would rather not think in the age category, but I can only say that you can't just avoid it. You just have to dig in, and some might do it easier, and for some it might be harder. What I find helpful is that you actually give a lot of support, and what I also realize is that sometimes people can take advice from colleagues better than from supervisors. So why not just have like, you know, the colleagues in the same office or, you know, on the same floor, just really work together on a certain case, like when the problem comes up, when in the actual situation, not going to special trainings in rooms where we learn is like 2.5 days is like, you know, the knowledge is gone. So it's actually just doing and sitting together on the desk and working together. And I realized that helps the most. And you can't avoid anger or bad behavior, because, you know, it's just something you have to bite. And it's not easy. No one said it's easy. It just have to be done. That's unfortunately the truth.
Yeah, maybe I'll also just add on in terms of agile leadership and design thinking mindsets. And I'm going to combine because I think they're capabilities. So what we're seeing actually in Singapore and Asia is actually organizations who are training the entire staff on agile mindsets as well as design thinking. Because I guess a few years ago, design thinking was all the rage. And actually in Singapore, they've moved beyond that. And now agile is all the rage. So I think from a leadership competency and a mindset perspective, I think both are actually, one is about human-centered design and understanding what it is to be human and empathetic. Agile being about speed and agility and resilience. So I think when you combine those two things together, they're really powerful. In terms of then rethinking. So I think more from a mindset perspective. Actually, that's why one of the first things that we actually did to try to test even whether our, you know, when we prototyped, because, you know, we're a startup, is actually we tested agile and design thinking to find out if we could train those mindsets using this mobile phone. And so that was actually one of the things of then blending technology with then the facilitation of daily habit building. Because it really is more of a mindset, which then also then translates into the culture of speed, of agility, of resilience, of creativity, which are absolutely critical. So you're starting to see agile leadership, you know, as actually a new capability as well.
One of the biggest organizations that I know of that deploys that system is in Holland. I forget the name, but it has 10,000 people actually, and it's quite impressive because they're organized in small teams. And just one thing that I wanted to say to connect to that is I recently interviewed Patty McCord for the Culture Lab podcast. She's the exec from Netflix. And she said something that sort of stuck in my mind when I heard this question. She said, we only hire fully formed adults in our company. And perhaps it's a good idea, because when we hire fully formed adults, and this is the assumption on which we operate, I think we need to give people more responsibility to manage the mess themselves.
But it's exactly, I mean, if we don't want to be resources anymore or not seen as resources, that implies that we have to take responsibility. And I like to come back to the orchestra. I mean, musicians highly work like that. I mean, they don't fulfill what is asked. They don't just, you know, rehearse the current pieces they play. They actually play much more to make themselves unbearable for the orchestra, to keep to secure their spot. And they're highly intrinsically motivated. Otherwise, you couldn't actually manage the amount of time you spend on playing. So every one of us has to take on more responsibility for our own development and make ourselves unbearable, and just make sure that we are fit for the future. And then it's in my point of view, it's a matter of checking in and checking out on projects. doesn't actually really answer the question about who's organizing it, but it definitely will be less organized by like some people. It will more organized when, i.e., work tools, whatever, but mostly through the employees themselves, because they just have to take on the responsibility.
I'd like to be bold and say I hate HR terminology in some ways. So I hate human capital, right? Capital is something we acquire and we write off over a bunch of years, right? I hate human resources because they're not resources, right? I think we should change it to human relationships, right? And we should think about our employees more like our customer base, right? We have to invest in them. We have to give them a great service. We've got to give them a great experience. And instead of getting a greater share of wallet, as you know, we're in financial services land, right? We talk about share of wallet. We're trying to invest in getting a greater share of effort, right? Greater share of attention. And I think that if there's something an HR department could do, is to go and spend some more time with marketing, right? Understand how they understand their customers. Understand the very systematic way that they look at customer experience. You know, we're talking about employee experience, and we've seen a huge growth from that. But we're making exactly the same mistakes that marketing guys did 15 years ago, right? It's the marketing, you know, go to a marketing conference, understand about how you build those relationships. You know, if I'm going into my bank, I don't get the same relationship. I don't get the same support as the private banking folks. I definitely don't get the same support as the ultra high net worth clients, right? We need to think about this in a systematic way, not to give people great employee experiences and build on that relationship in a cost as no object way, but being really systematic and saying, okay, this person is going to be worth this amount. And it might not be the most expensive person. It might be the person that you're going to have for 20 years and you can get value every single year. So I think we need to rethink about HR as the business owning the employees and as a way where you have to persuade them every single day to come and produce their best.
The fact is that people work less and less in one company. It's not 20 years, 10 years, it's 5, 3, 1.5 years even, right? Mm-hmm. So this trend will not stop, and probably they will even work shorter. Now, on the other hand, we have this nice thing about investing in culture, but the culture is oriented to the long term. Isn't it a little pointless at this moment looking at the future of the HR and caring about the culture? Shouldn't we more think about going forward, few steps ahead, and see what's beyond that? Because if we now invest in culture and then people will just go somewhere else. I really like the idea of the holacracy, of course, having adult people hired, but it's not everywhere. And right now, the cost invested in this culture might be too much and it will never pay off. So what would be a better alternative? Or maybe you understand culture somehow else. So this I would like to know. What do you think about that?
Shall I take that? I love a good challenge. Thank you so much for asking this question. So here is the thing. Culture outlives individuals in the organization. So the wonderful thing with culture is that, and there's a wonderful video that you can see on YouTube with monkeys. And it shows basically how culture is created. Maybe you have seen it, but basically what happens is that there are some monkeys in a cage and there is a bunch of bananas hung at the ceiling. And of course, the first reaction of a monkey is it climbs the ladder to reach out for a banana. And when it does that, all the monkeys in the cage get sprayed with ice cold water. So eventually, of course, they learn that reaching out for a banana, not a good idea. So they are really hungry and getting more and more hungry, but they stop reaching for a banana. So for some strange reason that really we wouldn't understand, well, there was this punishment, so that's the reason they don't reach out for the banana. But then what happens is the scientists actually started to remove the original monkeys and replace them with new ones who didn't have the experience of the ice cold water. And what do you think happened? Yeah, so the new monkey, unsuspecting that something like this could happen, it climbed the ladder, it reached out for bananas, and the rest of the monkeys, it basically beat it to almost death, but not entirely. And so it quickly learned not a good idea to reach for the bananas. And the interesting thing is that eventually scientists replaced all the monkeys in the cage. None of them had the experience with the ice cold water, and none of them reached for bananas even when they were super hungry. So this is a negative example of, of culture and sort of habitual ways of behaving. But I think it just illustrates that it outlives an individual, and it's a way of doing and thinking and some unwritten norms and behaviors that get transmitted by individuals and really, to a large extent, I think also live in the collective unconscious. So people are not really aware of that, but it's there. And you transmit that. It's a little bit like when you join a new company and you immediately realize, oh, my way of doing things is not, it's not the right way to do that. It takes you how many days? How many days do you need to figure out how to fit in? 2? Yeah.
I think Enrico wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think the fact that people are changing more often their employer, and I was referring before to my son. He's in a cohort with the average life expectancy of 100 years. So I don't know how often he will change his employer. But I fully agree that is rather an argument that we as organizations care more about the culture, because we often say everybody's a talent, but we forget the second sentence, that is, everybody's a talent, but not in every organization.
Yeah.
Because people fit better to some organization and not to others. And that's why there's beyond what we do in nice brochures and how we sell ourselves in the internet as an employer, at the end, as you said, when people come in, first day and second day, they will get a feeling, they will get a sense. And that is what makes them come back or not. And it will happen more often that people come back, because we're also not in a economy anymore where we said, yeah, once somebody left, our doors are closed. That's, at least in my view, it's stupid. No, I have left SAP for good reasons, because I wanted to get some other experience, and I went back for good reasons. And there are many other people. Actually, we have 2 board members in SAP who left the organization and came back. And we need to understand an organization that is rather enriching, and stay in touch with these people and then see how we can integrate them best. But they will only come back if they feel there's authenticity with the culture they expect.
So definitely, I think we can learn a lot about marketing. If you look at marketing, how they used data in the last 15 years. And if you look at how HR is using data, HR is not using data. So definitely, if we start to use data, we can become credible business partners for the business, but we are not doing, most of us are not doing. So I think there is a lot there in, and the question may be on culture. Many companies, especially when a new CEO arrives, start to talk about culture. Look at Novartis, look at other companies, they start to talk about culture. And then they start big transformation programs. And my question is how you can measure progress in culture at the end of the day. Because a lot, of course, ultimately you can measure it when you look at the bottom line, how much earnings the company is doing. But I think as an HR professional, you would like somehow also to measure intermediately where you stand with your development.
From a people analytics perspective, I take the view that intangibles like the one that you mentioned, and I've described culture as an intangible, you can measure. You can measure anything as long as you can observe it, right? And culture is a word, I'd argue, a bit like engagement, where we haven't really got clear definitions, and therefore the measurement is often a bit more intangible. I think if you can define culture explicitly, the thing I always teach in my course is you add the words "as observed by" or "as measured by" on the end of it. You can do it. So you have to look at you can't just sort of say, this is an amorphous term, culture, we will measure it, but how would you observe that culture? And it might be because of, we will measure it by going and asking people this survey question. We will measure it by the way that they're talking about it in these aspects. So we have to be tangible. But I think in terms of the other question, which was around why invest in this type of labour market, when I look at the demographics, actually, people jumping jobs is an urban myth, right? It hasn't changed remarkably. It's one of those things that everybody thinks Gen Y people change job all the time. They don't. When I was at that sort of age, I changed jobs more often. We probably all did, right? The difference is that when I left university in early 90s, the labour market was completely different. In the UK, we had an unemployment of 10% or something. Now we're 3%, right? We've got demographics where the number of people leaving the workforce is increasing to the ones that are there. So what's this done is, in terms of the market, is it's changed the economic signals, right? Whereas in 93, the company had pretty much all the power. Now the employees have pretty much all the power, especially, we're data scientists. We have about as much power in terms of the job market as you potentially could get at the moment. And there's lots of other skills, not necessarily just high-skilled skills that do this. When we look at our data in terms of what people are looking for in a role, we see that it's almost like a balance, right? There's some good things about the job, right? I get paid a lot, the pension's nice, I'm working with some really great people, the teamwork's good, I'm learning, I know I'm going to be learning next year. And then we've got a bunch of disagreements. I've been doing this job for 3 years, I'm getting bored. Barry in my department is toxic, and I would like to get, I see things, what can we do to improve your working life here? Sack Barry, right? So we have this sort of balance, and the one thing that we get is that people start looking elsewhere when that's out of balance, right? And culture's one of those things that appeals to people. It appeals, I've worked in firms where it was just brilliant working in those organizations, and I've worked in firms where it wasn't, right? And if you develop a culture which is great, it means you don't have to pay as much on the other side of the other part, right? You can balance off great culture with maybe salary. Right? You don't have to go and compete on money all the time for people, because you can offer them something that your competitors can't. It's really easy to be a follower on salary. If I'm Credit Suisse and UBS has just put up the salary for the customer relationship managers, I can put up the salary. Right? It has an impact on the bottom line, but it's quick. But you can't change the culture really quickly, and you can't make something. And that culture might not be right for anybody, but it can be really, really, really sticky. So I think that's why I would be investing in culture.
Can I just have a minute regarding how to measure? Because actually there are tools that you can use to measure culture. And so you can not only measure culture, but also look at the climate, and they seem to be slightly different things. And you can also have a look at the levers that then you can pull to change culture. And interestingly, you can also measure the outcomes of culture. So you can see how the culture that you have affects your organizations. It's the ones that I know and I respect and use are in a survey form, and they are supported by 40 years of research. So it's really, really valid. But whatever you use, I think you need a solid model at which you are going to look to really define what is culture in our understanding, what does it consist of, and then looking at those elements with a tool that has been validated and that has been used for some time. Because I'm not a big fan of experimenting with those things ourselves, because we really stand on shoulders of giants. And I think, speaking of change and what's new is coming, we shouldn't forget that as well, that there have been people before us and they've been doing this work for 40 years. Yes, maybe they have some bad habits, but I'm sure that there is a lot of knowledge and expertise that we can build on.
Now it's a lot of focus on culture, and everyone says it's so important to have a great culture. So I would like to hear what you think is a great culture looking forward like 5 to 10 years.
Ooh. So young? You're smiling, or that's maybe because you're from Singapore. But...
Well, I'm actually American. I'm just a friendly person, so I like to smile. But I'm from New York, so I'm one of the rare New Yorkers who smile. But no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's something I think about. I have 2 companies, so I think about culture and how to create culture all the time. It's something that I intentionally do for both companies, and even though we were small, we actually spent a lot of time defining kind of. And my first company, Awaken Group, we call it the AG way, and we had principles that we co-created to actually define culture. And then for Nobi, we had the 7 Nobi ways, and we spent a lot of time thinking about and repeating, and actually it's part of our daily work. So one of our 7 Nobi ways is don't be boring. Only do things that make you proud, right? And so then that's a principle. And so if I think about the future of work in the next 5 or 10 years in terms of culture, every culture is different. Every leadership team is different. As a founder, the culture is in some ways a reflection of me, whether I like it or not. And so I have to live it and be authentic to those values. Otherwise, it's just a nice set of words on a poster board. So I think having your leadership team live out those cultural principles and values, I think is absolutely critical. But you can be really intentional, to design what those things are. And it actually sometimes, when it becomes beyond me and it becomes part of the culture, where my employees actually remind me, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's actually cool. Then it's actually been embedded into the culture. So I don't think there is one proper set of cultural values and what it should be. It has to be authentic to who you are. Just like in leadership, it actually has to be authentic to who you are, your personality. We're all different people. We have different strengths, different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences, and culture is the same because it's just an amalgamation of a lot of individual people. And so I think, but we do have an opportunity to create it, and I think we have an obligation. It's a living thing. And so even our cultural values and our cultural norms will evolve and should evolve, right, as times evolve. And it requires daily work, and it requires intentional design and intentional work because it's always moving. So if you're not intentionally investing in it, you're actually degrading it. So I think it's really important because it's really, really easy to fall into, I think, the left side of the chart. I think that you had, which was really by default versus by define, and that's a constantly moving thing.
So I can understand this is doable in a smaller organization, but Enrico, maybe can you tell us how do you do it in this gigantic dinosaur called SAP? That everybody button up as something, it's authentic. I think that's a challenge. Right?
I think there are two dimensions. One is there are cultural traits that are required to survive for every organization. You want to support people in building a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset, even if our education systems are not really doing a good job in building that growth mindset. But organizations will need people with growth mindset to survive, regardless of what business you are. Then depending on the business and even department of the organization, you want to have probably people who are more risk-taking or risk-averse. If I'm come in with a surgery into a hospital after an accident, I don't want to have the doctor very risk-taking say, let's try with Mr. Palumbo this new interesting way of making this operation that I saw yesterday on TV. No, I want him to just follow the procedure and save my life. So that is where you also need to differentiate, and I think that is the interesting part, that for the organizations to understand in which parts of the organization these small differentiations, we cannot say we had also situations where we said, we need to be risk-taking, and then the people who develop us and they love code and they want to be precise, it does not fit for them. No, it's also good that they have a rejecting attitude because they know we don't want to take risk because supply chain is 70% of world transactions run on SAP systems. We don't want to screw that up. We need to have our controlled processes, otherwise supply chain will stop and people will not get paid and whatever. So you need to have a rather clear autopsy of which parts of that elements you want to have in which part of your organization. And then you need, as you said, the leaders who lead by example. And those leaders you get, again, by promoting the right people, hiring the right people, and sanctionize those who don't behave in the way you want them to behave.
In terms of organizations, I think we need to think about building differentiated organizations, right? So the question was, what's a great culture look like? Well, I think that differs, right? You need to understand who you're trying to get, If we're looking for data scientists, here in Zurich, I can't remember it's something like a third of ETH gets taken up by Google or something crazy stuff. And all of the great people that they were doing their doctorates with for the last X years, half of their senior folks are working in the side of organizations. So we can't compete on those type of grounds. So we based ourselves in St. Moritz. Right? Oh, how hard is it going to be to get people to come up and work there? And I said, well, we can offer something that Google can't. You can be on the lift at 7:45. You can do a few things and you get in the office at 10, right? So we don't appeal to everybody there, but if you're a ski nut, we can give you something Google can't. And I think all of us as an organization need to think about differentiation and being different to our competitors. And if we think about what is the ideal, what is best practice, then actually we're just being the same as everyone else.
Well, scary. I'm a job seeker, so I'm hacking HR here. I wanted to ask about how in the future we can find new talents, because most of the time we are so focused on key words and everything what is about experience and expertise and professional diplomas. But more and more is important the values, soft skills, and how we can find those people who, just...
Yeah. Shall I take that?
Who wants to take that? Yeah.
I can start. I can get the conversation rolling. I think it's interesting. I'm going to take a different perspective now, so I'm not going to talk about culture for a change. So I think it's interesting what some companies are doing already in order to ensure that there is more diversity in the workplace, because I think that's a really important piece. You don't want only Oxford University graduates who are white and preferably male. You want people who come with different cognitive skills and different way of seeing things. And technology, actually, I've seen and I've heard is helping with this. For example, I don't know if you guys have heard about emotional AI. So emotional AI is basically an algorithm software that reads our emotions, and it's in a better position very often than we humans are to identify how the person feels, whether what they're sharing with us is really true, etc., etc. So that's quite an interesting thing that companies are using already, and amongst those companies is Unilever, who basically uses that at the very early stage of recruitment alongside some simulations that they put people through in order to make sure that they get the right capabilities and the right skills rather than a profile that looks good on paper with all those keywords, as you say, but unfortunately doesn't work out in practice.
I think what's going to be more important, especially Switzerland, is not very advanced in this part. It's like the recommendation by someone. I mean, it's like if it's a working colleague or someone, if you get a recommendation, that's, I mean, we know it from traveling. We believe our friends much more than like some official like advertising. Switzerland is very conservative in this case. It's still a little bit shady if you get a recommendation, but I just want to say it's a door opener, but I have to prove myself afterwards. It's not that I get a job because someone opened the door for me. I have to prove myself. So let it happen. And the network is really important. I mean, you see what happened tonight. I mean, we haven't met before. And when did you start? In June, organizing the entire thing? So it's all network based. And I think we are an incredible crowd. You are an incredible crowd. So let the network work for you and just spread word. Don't be ashamed or even afraid of saying, I'm looking for a job. That's something, I mean, honestly, almost everyone is constantly looking for a new opportunity. It depends on certain points. I mean, a friend of mine always said it's like 20% of my current annual salary. That's the loyalty I have towards my current employer. So just don't be afraid of open up and get recommendations and talk to people.
Yeah, maybe just one thing to add around kind of AI and technology. So there's actually a lot of really cool stuff happening that are actually already predicting the future skills and jobs that are required. So, because we're partnering with someone in Singapore called JobCred, and what they basically do is they can scrape all the different assessments and on all the different future skills, and then figure out then what is the profile and the skill set that you need to develop. And that's kind of looking a little bit into based on jobs that have open, that jobs that are open and unfilled. Yeah, and then the people, because I think one of the challenges we have today is actually not really an unemployment issue. We actually have an unemployability issue. So we have a lot of people looking for jobs and a lot of companies looking for people, yet the two are not matching, right?
And so,
and that's actually just going to get worse. So I think there's a huge opportunity to look at even technologies to figure out what is the future of skills. And on that note, sorry, but I actually forgot to mention, because I brought gifts because I'm visiting and I flew in like thousands of miles to be here. So I'm going to give everyone the free gift of mobile microlearning. So my colleague there, Andre, so if you want that, he'll kind of give it to you. So please go see him afterwards, because I think the idea, because we took some of the future skills that we know that we need, and we launched actually the world's first mobile microlearning library that's actually designed for mobile learning. And so, the content that we put in there was based on future skills and the content that things that we actually all should be learning and knowing, right? So, so if you want that, you can see Andre, the guy right there, friendly looking guy.
Okay, one last comment.
I didn't mean to have the last comment. I'm going to flip that question and say, well, how as organisations can we expand the workforce? I think there's a huge opportunity to really rethink about work that we're doing to create or to tap into untapped markets. Right? There's a big trend in terms of, as I said a moment ago, there's a lot of people leaving the workforce. Does it have to be black and white? I'm working here, then next day I work zero, right? Can we grey that area? Can we develop policy? Can we get rid of the policies that say that has to be black and white, right? Can we do it? Here in Switzerland, I know I was one of the rare people that was sort of dad at home while my wife went and did corporate life. And it's, one of the problems in Switzerland is childcare is just so expensive, right? So there's so many good people. That's a few of us, but I have to be honest, on statistics, it's mostly women who are. Can we rethink about work there? We're building an app internally for our folks to do model training, right? There's a part of our process. We just need a human to have a look at something the computer's not. And we're building out, which is going out next week. We've designed it so you can do it in 1-minute jobs on a mobile phone while sitting on the bus, right? Because we just need to scale this really, really quickly. And we need to think as all organizations of how we can go into these untapped markets, how we can change work so that we can expand our markets.
I love the interaction. Maybe there are some more questions, but we have run out of time. And I have a little question for the speakers. If you could give a short advice where to start to do something in HR, an advice for HR to start doing something tomorrow. So a very quick sentence where they should go.
Don't need to start with you. I'll just give you the mic.
Okay. Just one thing?
Yes.
Just one thing. Well, I am a big believer in the power of intention. So I would say first think about what your intention is and what do you want to create? What is the desired impact? We usually don't take time to really flesh it out and really ask ourselves, when I think about myself as the HR professional, what legacy do I want to leave? What do I want to create? What do I want to contribute to? And also, as a whole department, what is our legacy going to be? And what is the service that we're providing to our employees really going to be? When you are clear about that, everything else becomes much easier.
Thank you.
Saving battery here. Sustainable business. My advice is, since Reto already suggested to look into what marketing is doing, I really seriously suggest, if you have not done it, take some time to look how technology is developing, because it will significantly change how HR is delivering in future.
Building on that, I think be bold and courageous. and be willing to be one of the pioneers and the first in your organization to try tech and work with tech startups, right, who are not as developed, give you, because it's a way of disrupting actually your own mindsets and also building the ecosystem to actually also spark innovation. So be willing to do that and not just, do things that are always proven because that's kind of the status quo, but be willing to try and be bold and courageous because you make a difference.
I would spend a few hours trying to get to understanding of what AI is and what AI can do. I'm sure PwC will have lots of this sort of information, but there's all of the consultancy companies have got executive guides to AI. McKinsey has some great resources. As I say, all of them have. Understand what it can do, and then start your mind thinking about how you could apply these simple techniques within your organization.
Look at the data you already have in your service desk systems, for example. Pick the top 2 or 3 recurring, most frequent requests that take up most of your HR service people's time, and be courageous and pilot. We heard a lot about agile development. Have a few sprints at putting up a chatbot, for example, or even a speech-enabled dialogue system, and see how your employees will adopt that. Because, like with Google Duplex in the future, I think that the more courageous you are in proposing something really exciting, the more surprised you'll be by the uptake in your organization.
I have one, thank you. I would say don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. It's important. And just ask the question, if you could do whatever you want, what would you do? No condition, just what would you do? That's usually a very good question to start.